Hi. So, if we're going to talk about engaging with culture, if we're going to talk about engaging with culture transformatively, we're going to have to go beyond discussions of incarnating. We're going to have to go beyond discussions of proclamation. We're going to have to go beyond even notions of how persons are transformed, or even beyond notions of like starting groups or planting groups, churches. We're going to have to talk about changing the fabric of how people go about becoming humans. The forces that give us our first reasons, the forces that first shape us, those forces have to themselves be transformed in order to transform people. What formed us, the levers that were used to form us, must also be transformed so they can transform us. Let me stop waxing philosophical and get real concrete. Um, what we're aiming at when we talk about cultural engagement, we're not aiming at the erasure of culture or the blurring of culture or the destruction of cultures. A lot of anthropologists really throw stones at cross-cultural workers and say we're trying to destroy cultures, and it's just categorically not true. We're trying to help cultures escape destruction, in fact. Um, but historically, when workers like me, like you, have attempted cultural transformation or societal change, uh, there are some really bad examples in history, recent history, even last few hundred years. Really bad examples of that. Um, it's gone quite poorly. One example is British colonialism. The Brits, with some with really great hearts, went places with economic stimulus and went places to kind of exploit resources, like the British East India Company, and along with them went M workers. And these workers went and essentially made the world England. What what was supposed to be force commando units, inculcating the culture of the kingdom of heaven, instead inculcated the culture of their sending country. We, it, the American M worker movement, did similar things, even while trying very hard not to. And so you'll get situations where tribal villages will have storefront fellowships with speakers, and the rest of the village doesn't even have electricity, like with electric amps and stuff and guitars. And the liturgy, the way of gathering looks just like if you had just snatched it up out of the Midwest or out of California and drop it in the middle of the jungle or on the top of the tallest mountain in Peru. This transplanting of cultural norms does obliterate and obscure culture, and that's not at all what we're after. And it also doesn't really produce transformation. So that leads us to a question, right? It leads us to how does Paul think about cultural transformation? How does he coach it? How does he try to provoke it? How does he talk about it? What language does he use? What kind of words, what kind of phrases does he leverage in order to provoke or catalyze cultural change? Toward that end, you start to scan the New Testament, and you start to find things like this language of putting off and putting on. This would be a great time to pause and to read Colossians and Ephesians, and to look for the ways that Paul talks about putting off and putting on. He'll talk about putting off the old man. And some translations will say the old self, but that really is not at all what it actually says. In Greek, it says the old man. Put off the old man. And then he'll locate propensities towards sin in the members of your body, of my body, of our bodies. He'll say, put that off, and put those members, put those bits of body even to death, execute them like with a mortal wound. And then put on the new man, which is being created after the image of the first resurrected one. When I first read that, like 100 years ago when I was small, it sounded sort of like a swapping of grocery lists. Stop doing these bad things and start doing these good things. Be careful, little feet, where you go, and little hands what you do, and little eyes what you see. Don't do these bad things. Don't be naughty, but instead be nice. It was sort of like a more involved Santa Claus is coming to town. Not super helpful. And then as I grew, I ran into people like Dallas Willard and Richard Foster and some of the mystics, and they would talk about it like this. They would say that like our bad choices, our choices towards sin, which are rooted in the sin that dwells in us, the sin nature that we've all got. When we make those choices, it creates momentum, and that momentum is actually stored, not in the place in our brains where we make conscious choices, but it's stored in the place where we have muscle memory almost, or we have habitual reaction. And that's why Paul locates it in our members of our bodies, because sometimes it even goes to the point of appetite. Like we have strong appetites toward evil that have been strengthened over a lifetime of making evil choices. And that made a lot more sense to me, and I think that gets us closer to the truth. When I was a kid, I had a pool in my backyard, a circular above-ground pool, and we would make whirlpools. We would go left. We would just go counterclockwise for a long time, and all the floats would be moving that way. And then suddenly we'd try to go clockwise, and we couldn't. The water would carry us. The water had recorded the momentum of our choices and persisted in insisting to go in that direction. This is something like what Paul's talking about. Is our choices create a momentum that is recorded in our tissues and predispose us to want evil and to do evil. Okay, so that got me a little further. But then I moved here, and after living here in Narnia for a long time, there are some just really bad practices that even the believers espouse. And looking back at the States, I see there are some really bad practices that believers in the States espouse. And even defend as correct, even defend as appropriate, as right, as godly, but they're just flat out, unbiblically, horribly, god-awfully wrong. We got them here, we got them there, we got them everywhere. And when you start to ask, like, why do you do that? Why is that assumed? They'll say, we're Narnian. This is how Narnians do. Or it's like it's almost written into the Constitution that we're supposed to behave a certain way. It's what it means to be American. But it's deeply not the Jesus way. It's deeply not the Jesus way, and they still, but it's the Narnian way, and so they do it like Narnians. I'm calling this place Narnia, in case you're not catching on, because I don't want to say the name out loud here in a public place. I think that's what Paul's getting at. When he writes to groups of believers, he'll say, you used to walk a certain way. We all used to walk certain ways. We used to have certain predispositions. Like the whole culture taught you to view and value and think certain ways, and to think certain practices were permissible or even good. And then he says, but they're not. They're not. They're all these culturally accepted or even culturally reinforced norms are from the old world. And the new world is coming on. So you need to put off the old mankind. And that's what man means. It's the old mankind. You need to put off the momentum of your broken cultures, the old mankind. Cultures are just how humans learn how to survive together in a given environment. And it's what becomes unconscious. So every culture has these unconscious predispositions toward evil, toward sin. And when you get a worker from another place, they're able to look at it and say, hey, you notice how you do that and you all think it's normal? It's not. Paul's doing that for the Ephesians. Paul's doing that for the Colossians, and he's saying, this thing that you think is good is not good. This thing that you think is normal is not normal. You got to put that off. You have to put off the momentum of the broken world, including your broken culture. And you need to put on the momentum of Jesus and the kingdom. You need to put on the behaviors and attitudes and dispositions appropriate to the new world. So that's why you got to put on the new mankind. God is making out of all the cultures of the world one new man, one new humanity that has a culture of its own, that doesn't obscure or obliterate the cultures of the world that are beautiful. It just frees the beauty in them to be beautiful without the burden of the evil that has become institutionalized in every culture on the planet. So let me go back to my first comments. We can't just incarnate, and we can't just proclaim, and we can't just make new disciples, and we can't just teach them how to apprentice themselves to Jesus. We also must, both looking at ourselves and looking at them, we have to be able to identify where are the places where my culture has taught me a normal that is evil or just straight bad, just unhealthy, unwise, foolish. Where has the foolishness, the wisdom of this world proven stupid? Where have I said things are all right that just aren't all right with God? And where has my culture taught me those things? And then as we are seeking to transform other cultures or seeking to catalyze the transformation of other cultures, we got to look and we have to say, here's some things that you consider normal, and without judgment and without self-righteousness, without disdain, say, those just aren't beautiful. Those aren't good. Those aren't the way of Jesus. Put those off and put on instead in their place these things. Let him who stole steal no more, but let him instead work and then give. Let him who lied lie no more, but let him instead say things that are fitting and good and truthful. It's just the things that we think that are right, they're just not all right. Okay, so part of cultural engagement is being able to see how we have become sort of sick with our culture's predispositions to evil, and kicking free of that wreckage and kicking our way into the momentum of the kingdom. Another part is being able to identify that with others in other cultures, and then being able to take the necessary steps, being able to say, here's what the Bible actually says. How are you going to move from what your culture has said is good to what really is truly beautiful and good? All right. So, having heard this, if you haven't read Ephesians and Colossians, take a moment and read those now, and look for those places where Paul says, we all used to be like this, but instead, let's do this instead. Okay? Thanks.